Hi everyone, I'm Dina with Mills Family Gardening. Today is February 23rd. We live in North Texas, Zone 8A. A few days ago, we had a really bad freeze that lasted a few days. The low for those days was about 11 or 12 degrees Fahrenheit, and the high was only in the 20s Fahrenheit. So you can imagine that it was a really bad freeze for us Texans. I covered a few plants with a frost cover, but I did not cover some of them. So in this video, I would like to show you what survived the freeze and what did not. Lavender cotton survived the freeze just fine. It was unfazed by very low temperatures. I think this is Cabiosa, and I never covered it. Nevertheless, it survives the really bad freeze. Back here, we have John Fennec phlox. You can see little seedlings that started coming up from the root, and they stayed green through the whole freeze. Now, right here, we have Mystic Rose salvia, and you can see that it's green. It stayed green through the freeze. Now, we have Egyptian onions in this container, and I was wondering if they would actually survive in the container because containers are more prone to be frozen and get freeze damaged, but these Egyptian onions look great. We have Salvia romeriana, or cedar Texas salvia, I believe. It looks just fine. Right there we have dianthus. All these top leaves are kind of old, so I'll have to trim them because the leaves on the bottom are newer, and after I fertilize it, it will start growing again. You can see that we have snapdragons right here. And the tops died, obviously, because they're old, but the new growth that's growing at the bottom looks just fine. It did wilt. Some of it wilted right here, but I think that once it warms up, it will recover and be growing again. Here in Texas, snapdragons are perennial plants. Now, this is ranunculus, I think, and the older leaves have died from the freeze, but there's some new growth that you can see, the green little seedlings coming up. These are Shasta daisies that I started from seed a few years ago, and they stayed green through the freeze. This is pink skullcap. You can see that some leaves are still green, and it will recover just fine because it's a perennial. This is verbena. I believe it's a prairie verbena that I planted last year from a cutting, and it's survived the freeze. It never died. It's still green, so it's great. Now we have right here status. You can see that status did not survive the freeze, but the other status that we have in the other spot that I covered actually survived, and I will show it to you later. You can see that back there, this is yarrow, and yarrow in Texas is a perennial, and it survived the freeze. It's green. Now you can see right here, there is a plant that looks like a hollyhock, but I think it's a smaller version of a hollyhock. I don't have the exact name. I got the seeds on one of our trips and planted them. They came up. I can tell that it will survive, even though the leaves look wilted. I can see that there will be some new growth there. We have a few containers with pansies here, and you can see that they do look droopy, but after they warm up a little more and get more sunshine and water, they will perk up. In fact, some of the flowers are lifting up. You can see this container is still droopy, but those flowers are lifting up again. So they'll be just fine. I did move them into the back porch to protect them from the cold wind, and it seems like it did the trick, and they will survive just fine. Before the bad freeze, I started some seeds of sweet peas. They came up, and I transplanted them into the garden. And you can see that I even built a teepee for them already. But the sweet peas would not have survived the bad freeze. They look really good now, and the reason is I covered them with old kitchen towels, and that did the trick. They all look really good. They will survive, and they will keep growing. I just need to put some jute around the teepee, and they will be climbing up the teepee. Now next to them, we have this artichoke. You can see that this leaf looks pretty good, but the leaves on this side are wilted, and I think that's because I did not cover it real well, but I still have hope that it might come back. Now remember how the status in our other in-ground bed did not survive because I didn't cover it, but this is the status that I covered. In fact, it had a double layer of frost cover, and you can see that it survived, and it will be blooming this year. It's so exciting. Now right here we have dill. I think dill was the most important plant that I was worried about because we really like to eat a lot of dill. And so I made sure to use a double layer of frost cover, and the dill survived all those bad temperatures. We have kale here that survived also. Now we have Swiss chard that also survived. On this side of the bed, we have a combination of flowers and some herbs. You can see we have daffodils here, and some of the flower stalks broke. That's because I covered them because they were in the same bed with dill, and I was trying to protect the dill. But a lot of the flowers are still putting up flower buds, and pretty soon they will all be blooming. It's going to be so beautiful. Daffodils do not need to be covered. They would have survived the freeze just fine. In fact, the ones on the other side of the bed, you can see they're not bent and they look just fine. But since they were in the bed with other plants, I wanted to protect other plants, and so they got covered also. But you can see that in this bed, we also have cilantro. Cilantro survives hard freezes just fine. I've been using a lot of it in the salad. That's why it doesn't look very bushy. And also dill that I was trying to save, and I think it will come back. But you can also see that we have these seedlings of larkspur that came from last year's larkspur that we're growing here. And larkspur is a very hardy, frost-tolerant, cold-tolerant plant that will survive any kind of freeze, and it did survive and it looks fine. And this year we're hoping to get beautiful blooms from this larkspur. Now right here, this is the in-ground bed that I also covered with a single layer of frost cover. This is garlic, and garlic survived just fine. I don't think I should have covered it, but since it was in the same bed with other plants, I thought I might as well cover it. Here we have some dill seedlings that I started just recently and decided to plant them in the ground. I don't know they will come back. They do look a little droopy, but there is still some green growth there, so who knows, they might come back. But I think I will start some dill seeds inside. Now right here we have a row of beets. They do look like they actually got damaged. I don't think these will come back. But some of the beet seedlings do have new growth here. You can see bright green leaves that are coming up. They're new baby leaves. So that means that it's alive and it will recover and be growing. And that's interesting because the beets on this side were covered with a double layer of frost cover, and that probably gave them extra protection. Now you can see right here we have radish seeds. These are watermelon radishes and they look fine. They were under the cover also. And right there, next to beets, we have some bok choy. I need to thin them. I wanted to keep several seedlings in the ground in case one of the seedlings dies. You can see that bok choy looks really good. It was under a double layer cover, but I think a single layer would be sufficient for it. And also I need to spray it with some spinosad or BT because it seems like flea beetles are already active and chewing and making all these little holes in the leaves. I covered kohlrabi also with a frost cover, and you can see that it's looking so good, and actually a lot of them are ready to be harvested. This one looks real big. And then there's this one that looks big also, so I'll have to harvest them and cook with them. I think I have to harvest all of them. Before we had the bad freeze, our blueberries started putting out flower buds, and I was worried that they would die, they would get freeze damaged, and we would not get any berries from them. For that reason, we moved both of these containers inside of the house, and they stayed in the house for a few days. And you can see that a lot of flowers have opened up because they were in the warm environment, and a lot of new leaves started growing on these blueberries. So I'm glad I brought them inside because otherwise all the flowers would have froze to death and we wouldn't get any berries. But now that we have all the flowers, a lot of flower buds, we will get berries in the spring, I hope. And that's one of the advantages of container gardening, that you can move your containers depending on your weather. Now right here we have a hollyhock that came up last fall on its own, and you can see that it did get some freeze damage. But I think it actually might come back from the root. There will be new growth down there. Look at how good this bachelor button seedlings look. They came up on their own last fall, and they're very hardy plants. They will survive pretty much any kind of freeze, at least here in Texas. Even the seeds that I planted right before the bad freeze came up, and they're still alive. They did not die. So bachelor button is a very hardy plant that you do not need to start from seed inside. You can plant the seed straight into the garden, and they will come up and survive any kind of freeze. I had some Swiss chard seedlings in one of the raised beds that I did not cover during the hard freeze, and they all died. But thankfully I have more seedlings, and I moved them to the porch area where it stayed a little bit warmer, and the seedlings were protected from the cold wind, and that is why they survived. Right before the freeze, we had some really nice warm days, and I planted all our onion plants. And of course, I was worried about them and covered them with just some old sheet that I had on hand. And you can see that they all survived. And in fact, the onions on this side, right on the edge here, they did not get covered because the sheet was not long enough to cover the whole bed. But even the onions that were on the very edge, they do look damaged, but they look like they will actually survive because the bulb looks pretty firm and the new leaves that are growing already, they're pretty healthy. In this small bed, we have a few flowers. Here is lamb's ear. I never covered this bed at all, and you can see that lamb's ear is still looking green. It's a great plant. Then we have some sedum autumn joy. They stayed green through the whole freeze. This is coreopsis that survived the freeze, but you can see that the leaves got chewed by these tiny little black bugs. I think they're some kind of black beetles. They destroy plants, so I probably need to spray the plant. And here we have more larkspur that did not cover, and you can see that it's still alive, it's green, it's happy, and it will keep growing. And the last plant that we wanted to show y'all is this oregano. It's a perennial here in Texas, and I think in a lot of growing zones. It's really great. It can work as a ground cover. It survives the heat, the cold. I even use it in some cooking, so it's a great plant to have in a garden. And these are the plants that survive the freeze. There are some perennials in our backyard, and obviously they will come back. I hope this video helps you decide what you need to cover or don't need to cover next time you have a hard freeze. Thank you so much for watching this video, and have a great day.